Hello, and welcome to another edition of AppSec Decoded. I'm Taylor Armerding, Security Advocate with the Synopsys Software Integrity Group, and this is the second of two segments on a recent report on AppSec from the Synopsys Cybersecurity Research Center, otherwise known as CERC. That report, the 2022 Software Vulnerability Snapshot, drew its conclusions from nearly 4,400 intrusive tests on more than 2,700 targeted software components or systems conducted by Synopsys Application Security Testing Services. And joining me to talk about the major takeaways from that report is Chai Bhatt, Security Solutions Manager with the Synopsys Software Integrity Group. Chai, thanks for joining us. So when we talked previously, you gave us a list of the main takeaways from the report. So we're going to go through each one and let you elaborate a bit on the significance of each finding. And behind door number one, know and implement optimal risk management requirements, including a full spectrum of AppSec tools.
So the full spectrum part is critical. So, there was a study done by IEEE a few years ago, and that showed that up to almost 50% of all your flaws can be attributed to design flaws. Wow. So no amount of automated testing in your SDLC is going to detect a design flaw. So, that's right there, almost half your flaws. If you're just doing automated testing, you're leaving the door open for, design flaws for a hacker to exploit. And the other thing we found from this report was that up to 20% of the vulnerabilities we discovered were the cross-site scripting vulnerability, the XSS vulnerability. And this is one of the most critical, highly destructive, common vulnerabilities out there.
So now takeaway number two is, as I understand it, that so-called low-risk vulnerabilities may not necessarily be low risk for your organization. So just don't dismiss them out of hand, right? So talk about that.
True, yeah. So typically low-risk vulnerabilities can be categorized into two categories. One is low-risk, high-impact, or high-impact, low-risk. So and low-risk, high-impact could mean something completely different for your unique application or your unique business case.
Yes.
And it could mean high impact for your organization.
Right.
You never know until you do the research. And on the other hand, the low impact, high risk vulnerabilities can be chained together by an experienced hacker to compromise your application. And in this study, for example, we saw that 50% of DAS tests and 40% of pen tests found the verbose server banner vulnerability. And this type of vulnerability, while it's deemed as low risk, exposes critical information such as the server name, the type, and et cetera. So it gives the hacker ammunition that's necessary to be able to compromise your system. Right. And that's why it's, you can't ignore low risk vulnerabilities.
Okay, thanks. And behind door number three are third-party library vulnerabilities. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so third-party library vulnerabilities are considered a critical defect. They're in the OWASP top 10 category. Yep. And in this study, we found 20% of pen tests and about 25% of SAST tests found the third-party vulnerabilities. And what that means is if you have code that you're using for third parties, and it could be outdated code, right? So it could be code that's not does not belong to an active community. It hasn't been updated for a few years, or it's just been ignored, or it doesn't have a vibrant community that's contributing to the code. And you're using that in your application as a dependency. It could be exploited by a hacker very, very easily, and it could compromise your application.
So you need to know who made it and if they're maintaining it.
Exactly. If it's current, if they're maintaining it, if there's a vibrant community behind it that's supporting it, it's very important to know that.
Okay, great, thanks. That's, as usual, a perfect segue into the next question, or the final takeaway here, which is managing supply chain risk. And third-party libraries are part of the supply chain, right?
They are, indeed.
All right, and which includes the indispensable SBOM, the software bill of materials. Talk about that.
Yeah, so that's a great point. So, any given enterprise today will have hundreds, if not thousands, of applications running. And those thousands of applications are dependent on third-party libraries, on open source components. And these could be thousands of open source components
Oh, yeah.
and hundreds of open source
Right.
third-party libraries that these applications are dependent on. And you have to know what the ingredients are in your application. And if you don't have a list of your ingredients, and if you're not tracking these actively, it's very easy for a vulnerability to creep in and for a hacker to be able to exploit that known vulnerability and compromise your application.
Right.
So it's very important to have a good SBOM in place. And in fact, in the BSOM study that was done, we saw that there's a 35% increase in open source related activities. Right. So the industry is taking the SBOM message to heart, and they're actually practicing it, and they're putting the SBOM in place. They're having the right SCA tool to generate the SBOM, and they're tracking the open source component. So that's happening, and we're seeing that.
Right. Great. And as long as you mentioned it, we should offer a plug for the BSIM, the Building Security in Maturity Model, which is an annual report done by the Synopsys Software Integrity Group. And you need to check it out, right?
True.
Okay. And finally, those are the 4 main takeaways. And so in light of all those findings, what would you recommend organizations do to improve their security posture?
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks, Taylor. So, as I said earlier, it only takes one vulnerability to compromise your application. And, it could come from anywhere. So what the latest industry paradigm is, it's shift everywhere. Yeah. So what that means is that you're doing security testing everywhere in the SDLC as soon as you have the right artifact in place. So, the artifact could be a piece of code, and as soon as you have the code, you're testing it. Yep. And you're testing often, and you're testing as much as necessary all across the SDLC to ensure that you have every possible vulnerability, every possible design flaw and defect covered in your testing. And you have the list of vulnerabilities that your application has, and you have an expert look at those vulnerabilities, prioritize them based on your unique risk profile, and then provide you with remediation strategies and or put the appropriate security controls in place to make sure that you don't get compromised. So really, shift everywhere is kind of what all of the leading software security programs are doing these days to make sure that their applications are secure.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thanks so much, Chai. We've been talking about the major takeaways from the 2022 Software Vulnerability Snapshot. We hope that you will take those takeaways to heart. Once again, this is AppSec Decoded. Thank you for watching. I'm Taylor Armerding, Security Advocate with the Synopsys Software Integrity Group, where we help organizations build trust into their software.